it's more validated. And
Instead of Ethan.
Oh, it's just I get to see it. Oh,
You have it?
awesome. How you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good to see you. Hey, Herbert.
How are you? How are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Good.
Miss Stacy? How are you? Doing okay? Mr. Walmart? How's it going? Doing okay? Good. Oh, okay. Miss Veronica, you doing okay? Hi. You're a visitor. You're a visitor.
Visitors, yes. Hi, it's nice to meet you.
This turned out really great.
Did you see that?
It's very positive.
Yeah.
That's on my table. So
This would be a hard
You like where you live off at,
Okay, now I bring some of those.
Right here.
but
that way I can just.
you've never been there, but you.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Haven't you?
Now I see.
Over there. No, two of my good friends went to LSU, so they've been
So.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's
No,
like
that's,
that.
that's okay, that's perfect, because our dog is for the January board meeting to bring it. We did want to do it for 2021, so,
Okay, did you get ignore mine?
okay, I'll still respond to it, and then it says to you.
Yes, sir.
It was, sent to Congress, but I'll go with everybody, that's okay? On the dual language. Yes, okay, thank you.
Awesome.
See, I know.
It turned out
So it'll be
great.
folded, and then it's gonna be all, yeah.
We're excited about all the household.
All the households.
I know.
Yes, you will. If it doesn't get there, oh my gosh. I said if it doesn't get here.
Right.
This is how it is.
We're going down.
Muy bien, muy
Yes,
bien.
you guys. How you doing, sir? Good to see you. This is
Is this the final?
yes, this is
About as wide as these four chairs, you know. But so the other lane coming forward us with.
yes.
Sirens, like.
That's what she wrote in there, and she-
How this is.
got plenty of room to get there.
And he was in, was at 26.
Wrong way.
Yeah,
Okay.
Okay.
There's
Did you, yes, sir?
Yes, we're all.
Miss, Eva.
just get up one.
Put a circle.
Yeah.
Miss Eva?
Probably at this time.
There she could be.
Maybe
We were at
at
26 at the time, she said.
Yeah, maybe so. When they sent this out, they think it's right on. Okay, but.
So she told you anything different today? No. Okay.
Now I see it.
Really?
Where did you get your coat?
You gonna join us in the peanut gallery? You gonna join us in the peanut gallery?
I think there is a corner of it.
It's good stuff.
Good stuff.
Yes. At least you
Oh,
can
what's that mean?
and see them all. And then from there, it's fun. Come on out really quickly.
You didn't bring me in.
Would you like something served? We have water, dining?
Lemon drop.
Good.
Would you like some?
Thank you.
Awesome, thank you so much.
I think we should leave it.
Just look at this guy.
Oh.
Chris, are you standing or sitting somewhere in the midst of?
I'll be staying.
Okay. And think about that. Jill. Did you hear he's still? Yeah, it's going on. It's going on. For our household, so. We got to ready, get ready for the next one. It'll be like, so February, the next.
Number 50.
Oh, yeah.
Here's something.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Someone like this.
However many there are.
Kid, it's not
Very special. Our process for going. It's been she's going to see the education partners.
Yeah, sounds
We're going to start and then I'm sure she's on her way. She's running a little late. If you don't have it, that's okay. It's just right here. Good afternoon. The special call meeting of the South San Antonio Independent School District Board of Trustees will come to order. The time is 6:03 p.m. The date is December 9th, 2019, and the time is 6 p.m. Roll call, please, Michelle.
Miss Veronica Barba. Here. Mr. Kevin Rasco.
Present.
Mr. Homer Flores.
Here.
Miss Shirley Ibarra Peña. Mrs. Connie Prado.
Present.
Mr. Gilbert Rodriguez.
Present.
Miss Stacy Alderete.
Present.
Thank you, Michelle. At this time, can we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, Texas Pledge, prayer, and our call to action?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible. Will you please bow your head in prayer? As we begin this meeting, Lord, we want to give you honor. Thank you, God, for the time we have today to train and discuss the issues at hand. May you please bless each person who is taking time to gather here today, and let your hand of protection be on them throughout the holiday season and beyond. Amen.
Amen.
Our call to action.
All students enjoy successful educational experiences, empowering them to make decisions while enriching their lives in the future they create.
Thank you. First item on the agenda is citizens to be heard. Mr. Rodriguez, do we have any citizens to be heard?
Madam President, there are no citizens to be heard.
Okay. Therefore, in order to start our Team of Eight training, Ms. Ibarra is on her way. So if it's okay, let's start with a meal, and then we'll start the training once she arrives.
Okey-doke.
So I recess until Ms. Peña gets here.
Get your food. I'm right behind you. I have these.
How was your vacation?
Short.
Why? So have you come all weekend?
Well, you can call it that. Very broke.
But it's okay because of the vibe. It's total. That's the way I gotta look at it. Because if I look at it, he has to go there. He has severe concussion. So he wants to. He was going from Michelle. He should take him out of the car.
Yes, you did. Received the instruction sheet.
Because it was just a
Like a hard copy? Yeah, okay, all right.
Oh, yeah.
You serving?
Yes,
No.
Before you came, huh?
Thank you very much. Back in the day, I
No, no.
Well, before you give us any updates, I mean, everything you say that's
Just you get heard me speak. In favor.
So is there something my password?
I don't think just call.
Yeah.
Oh, no, why not?
No.
From that email that you just
The
read,
boundaries.
Oh,
Did you get
I
that?
never got it.
would you like to leave it today and get to you probably like Thursday? Is that'll work? Did it work?
No, Jim,
Mr. Mike, Mr. Flores is going to be in this as well.
Okay, I can do both tomorrow morning.
Mrs. Flores is not
Boundary, right, 'cause it changed.
Okay. Right, sit down, pay the price. It's gonna be, yes.
It's not clear. So it's gotten there. Right.
Great. Our one. This year we have great
Oh, yeah.
It's like,
Yeah, it's just,
red velvet.
In the whole show.
oh, yeah.
And the next, what, 2 years later, but it took.
And that was why we lost it. That was
We
why we
have
lost it.
49 campuses. Yeah, I can give you a list.
Here it is. Because I'm like, trying to swing it. They just.
So we couldn't,
Oh, no.
we want all, but we don't have a staff. So what they're doing is they're growing in as they retire them to.
I don't think
And that is
so.
the limiting factor.
Am I gonna go there? No. That's all there.
They did it, and.
So in the district I used to work in Mount Pleasant, what we did is we did a cohort. They got the staff, they covered it, but usually it's not perfect, but
With
it's a
Super
start.
kicked
Right.
out, yeah.
You're
Because I'll
supposed to
tell you
stay the
what.
whole time, that's
That's right. Personally, with my experience in Mount Pleasant, the scores of that cohort, phenomenal. And that district went from 5
There you go.
campuses to no other campuses.
I'm not swinging now.
And I think it was a good way to do that.
Oh.
That is a great point.
Do you like this one?
Right.
Oh, yeah. Well, you see, you already have a set. So you have a set here and here. So this one. So which one is this? So do you want it on this one or on this side?
No, but it's not.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, really?
Board members, if it's okay, Dr. Gilcrease has recommended we go ahead and start. And when she gets here, she'll be caught up. So we're going to start the meeting. We're going to reconvene into open session. Michelle.
Okay.
And the time is 6:14. Our first item is the Team of 8 training. Ms. Sendejo.
Good morning.
Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. Over our desk, we'd like to welcome Arnold Casey, who will be here delivering a Team of 8 training. So we thank you for being here this evening. Please feel free if there is any additional
Dinner that you may need, everything's accessible for you. Ms. Dr. Gilcrease, Dr. Groppel, welcome.
Glad to be here.
Yes, good to have you here.
We're going to spend a little bit of time together. As you know, there's board training requirements that you must fulfill every year. One of those is a team of 8. We now have 7 seated board members, so it's that time. The other part about this is that we're going to cover a lot in the material today. The best part is that when we get to the end, you're actually going to have homework that will be a part of this, and it will count as some of our time. So as we roll through this, we should be pretty quick getting through the beginnings of it. The best, I think, team of 8 training to start with for any school board is your local policy. And that's where we're going to start. This is the policy that your district has adopted. And the policy is that just that. It is policy. I do want to point out before we get into the actual words, you're going to hear different words used in a school district. Policy is a word that is clearly defined, and that is these are the policies, the pieces of information that govern the district that the school board has adopted. Okay, it may not have been you on the board when it was adopted, but the board has adopted these. Then there are other things called administrative regulations, and they are governed by your policy, but administrative regulations are those things that the administration puts in place to help implement the school board policy. Then beyond that, you will have what's known in the legal world as rules. And so let's think this through. Your board policy are those things that give you the authority to act. Administrative regulations are then clarifications on those. The biggest example I've always used in this to think about is you have a board policy about how to use your facilities. Okay? You've adopted it as a board, what your policy is on using facilities. Then the administration takes that policy and they develop the regulations on renting or using of your facilities. Then, even beyond that, there are some rules then that go into place when somebody does rent or use your facilities. I think that's a good illustration. The very first policy that I think you start with, and honestly you end with, is BAA. And that is just that it shall constitute a body corporate and shall have the exclusive power to govern and oversee the management of the public schools of the district. That policy you have adopted, it's formal, it's legal, but it is also represented in the education code. Another quick thing to point out, we're talking about things in the education code, which are statutory. They were passed in some legislative session. There are some things that come in up here under the administrative code, which is the state's admin regulations of how they implement those statutes passed at the state level. You'll notice these are all part of the education code itself. Then, you can see the next sentence there, you may adopt rules and bylaws necessary to carry out these powers and duties, and then all duties and powers that are not specifically delegated to the agency or to the State Board of Education rest in the local school district elected board. Now, you know, Dr. Groppel and I are going to do this together, so some of y'all know us well enough to know that you're always going to get stories thrown in the middle of all this, right? I personally think when you look at the governance structure in the state of Texas and the way we're set up with a state legislature, school districts, city councils, county commissioners, hospital districts, you have water districts, drainage districts, all kinds of governmental entities. The best structure that I can find is for a school board. And I love the fact that some very specific differences between boards and councils or commissions or those is the words that are used. If you're a city council person, if you are a state representative, you hear the words we're using? If you are a county commissioner, but the board's word is you're a trustee. You're not a representative. You're not a commissioner. You're not a council member from one certain party. You're a trustee. Even in single-member districts like South San Antonio, where you're elected within that single-member district, your title is trustee. So let's talk about the title of trustee. Anybody know the major use of trustee in the United States today, where it's still, other than a school board, do you know where else that it's used?
Finances.
Finances, right? Especially probate wills.
Right.
And then churches. Most formal religious organizations have people that they have an officer or an organization group of elders or deacons or whatever, but from the financial end, if you look at all of the documents, it says trustee. And that's just it. Right now, you are, whether you like it or not, you are entrusted with the care and the movement of this school district as a body corporate. And it's yours, you can. And I think that it's really, in my mind, the way that we set it up in Texas. Mirabeau B. Lamar, back in the mid-1800s, had this dream of what he wanted public education to be in Texas, and this is it, where it's designed to be entrusted to members of the community. There are a lot of other states that have to answer to a lot of other people other than their local community. What we have in Texas is the great opportunity to have all of that trust with people that we know. So what does that mean? Who's your state representative?
Freda Cortez.
Okay. Who's your state senator?
Pete Flores. And Menendez.
Who's your House of Representatives for United States Congress representative? And then you have 2 state senators,
Yes.
right? Hornan and Cruz. How many of those people do y'all see on a daily or weekly basis
None.
walking around in the grocery store, church, at the ball field? How many do you see? I mean, if you do,
You're lucky.
yeah. How much of an opportunity would you have as a citizen to interact with them to give them your opinion? How many of you, I will direct this to the new board members, how many of you found out how popular you are now at the grocery store? All of a sudden, everybody wants to talk to you, right? And I think that's really, sometimes it's a pain and it's not that much fun, but that's the beauty of how our system is set up. And there are people that keep trying to change this, and I'm not sure why they do, but there's nobody that can govern a local school board better than local people. Period. It's just the way it is. You know what your kids need. In 1947 or 48, as they were getting ready to pass the Gilmer-Aiken Act, back then, at the time, we had over 3,000 school districts in the state of Texas. And that consolidated down to about 1,100 public school districts, 1,150 in the late 40s. We're now down to about 1,050 public school districts in the state of Texas. All that's through consolidation or the end of public schools. Most of that is due to population shift and how the population in West Texas changed. The issue that what you find is this, and I'd love to use these people as my example. I was superintendent of Haskell, Texas, and we had Coahoma ISD was in our athletic district. They were 130 miles one way between Haskell and Coahoma. And so on a Tuesday night, play basketball, but the shortcut to get there was through Noodle, Texas. Noodle is still, it's actually not even a city anymore. It's lost its corporation as a city as well. But there's an old, beautiful school in Noodle that sits there that's empty. Because when you lose your school, you lose your identity and you lose everything that is about you. And so the beauty of our system is that even when that happens, we still try to make sure that those local people in Noodle have a voice in what's going on. All right, that'll be the longest one of these I talk about, but I think it's so important for two reasons. Number one, I think it's important for the community to know what they have in you. And then more importantly, I think it's even more important for you to know the trust that the community has put into.
Just out of curiosity, what was the Noodle mascot?
You know,
I don't know. I don't think they ever had a high school.
No, I don't.
I'm trying to think what it was good.
Yeah, I don't know.
If you want to play a mascot game,
Yeah, now we could play.
we're up.
But I don't know if Noodle did have a mascot. So, then, in your policy BAA, Dr. Gropel's gonna help me work through these. There are several of them here, but these are what is known as your mandatory powers and duties. So you see the four that are up there, and we won't read through them individually. Did you know all that was your responsibility?
I would say yes. And quickly, we got to know that.
Yeah. Which one of those do you think, out of those four, are the most difficult? It is the most difficult one. The last, yeah.
I think it's number one.
You know,
There's no right answer, by the way.
yeah, I would say, for me, the third one, just based on the 1 year experience that I have, out of all those up there, I would probably think that one was that required the most input, the most collaboration, the most truthfulness.
I think they're all important though.
You got a whole list of them coming, so.
Yeah, it's a long list of these. Collaboration is hard for some people. Don't overlook that. I mean, it's a real challenge. And those guys that went to Noodle, if you've ever been to Ector County, there's one other town in Ector County beside Odessa. Any ideas the name of it? Pretty practical. 14 miles west-northwest of Odessa is no trees. No word, no trees. My son coached in Odessa for
Okay, no trees.
and there are no trees. No towns, no trees.
But when you, well, I will say this, when you left Noodle to go back to high school, you had to drive through Hamlin, and the mascot of Hamlin is the Pied Pipers.
Just down the road from the Floyd-Data Whirlwind.
That's exactly right.
Okay, let's flip the page. Okay. We just went through some of this. Adopt an annual budget as required under Education Code, as you see. In about 1986 or 87, somewhere in there, when superintendents went to Austin during the legislative session, the best entertainment in the city, Ms. Prado, don't take offense to this now, was the Austin ISD school board meeting. Because the school board, the law said, school board president, budget officer of the district. Okay? So the Austin ISD president of the school board took it upon herself to prepare a budget. And the administration took it upon themselves to prepare a budget. You can imagine what those board meetings were like. It literally was some of the best entertainment in the city. I will tell you that one thing we are doing is we have prepared a budget calendar for staff and then board to review for South San ISD so that everybody will know where we are on January 6th and February 15th and whatever. And when it comes March 15th, we're going to know how many people we're going to hire that year. We're going to give the administration an opportunity to take care of that duty. But I'm not criticizing anybody. I'm really not, but we've got to have a smooth start to the next school year and getting that budget adopted properly with the South San ISD budget adoption process. It's going to be really important. You'll decide what it is. I'll give you a little boost along the way if you want it. If you don't want it, tell me. I'll get out of one. Okay? But that's something we really all need to work together. That was unfair to you this year. It was unfair to everybody. Yes, you did what you had to do. I understand that. I'm not criticizing one iota. But it'll be in all our best interest to be a little happier at the end of that next year. And so we'll try to make it. So monitor the finances. You have, this is a giant word, fiduciary responsibility. Okay, if you don't know what that means, look it up. If you want to resign tomorrow, go ahead. You have responsibility. Unlike, I don't know, how many states pay board members now? You have any idea? 30? Yeah, I can remember when it was like 10 or so. But you have responsibility without compensation. That's something that I try to avoid if I were you. Ensure that we get an audit, okay, on time, and then an end-of-year financial report to the community. All a part of transparency, all a part of things you should want to do. Yes, we have to do it, no doubt about it. But I said to the boards that I had the privilege of working with many times, the more you know, Homer, about what's in that budget, the better off I am. Okay. And sometimes that doesn't happen. That's what I'll say. Okay. Conduct elections. but with the legislature, they try to keep this a moving target and do the best they can sometimes to make it a little difficult for us to conduct our business, but we overcome that. That's not a problem. Hearings. When I was superintendent for 11 or 12 years there, when possible, I made myself the hearing officer because that's some of the least fun you can have. So I liked for the people who worked for us to be able to do their job and not have to sit through those kinds of things. I figured I was getting paid more than they were, so I just do it, and so we did. And I don't think you have an internal auditor. I'm not aware of it if you do. If you have an internal auditors must by statute report to the board. Adopt a policy providing for employment and duties of district personnel. I would assume you have that in place. The second one is one that, I don't remember what legislator introduced that bill, but you.
No, it's had variations of it every session for the past 15 sessions.
Well, and it had about 3 variations before they got anything passed on that, but it was teacher organizations talking about too much paperwork. That was right after teachers basically had no paperwork, to be very honest about it.
These are discretionary. Now, everything up to this point were shalls.
Yeah.
The board shall do all of those things. Now it moves into the things you may do.
And these are things that the state is in no position to absolutely control the local. Like Gilchrist said earlier, you, right here locally, know better what you need right here locally than somebody who goes to Austin for 140 days every 2 years. A lot of people say it'd be better if it's 2 days every 140 years, but it's probably not going to come out that way. So, issue bonds and pay for those bonds, basically what that comes down to. I had the privilege of working 12 plus years in the bond underwriting business, and we'd be here the rest of the night if I started telling stories about that business, I'm told. Employ someone to assess or collect the taxes, and you hear legislators talking all the time about how horrible our appraisal districts are. Have you not heard criticism of Bexar County appraisal districts? Well, there aren't many of us in the room who remember the days before appraisal districts. 1979, the Pivotal bill, that's Czechoslovakian beer. The Pivotal bill passed, which did away with local assessment and tax, or local assessment, basically, is what it really did away with. What it was back then, Gilbert's the tax assessor collector. I'm his brother-in-law. I got 100 acres of land. It's valued at $1,000. Kevin's a guy he doesn't like. He has 100 acres of land, but he's valued at $50,000. Okay, it just was you've heard good old boy system. That was the real prototype of the good old boy system. So the Pivotal bill and its follow-ups have some warts on them. But let me tell you, what we have right now in the appraisal district and the appraisal of taxation in Texas is far superior to pre-1979. Please don't let them go back to that stuff. We give ourselves plenty of opportunities to be the laughing stock of America. Anyway, we don't need another one. And there's a law, you can tell that last one, you can tell somebody got on a representative or senator because some school board wouldn't call a person below the superintendent to come to the board meeting for a hearing or cross-examination, you might call it. So what in the world were they doing to pass that last bill? They just didn't have anything else to do that day, in my opinion. Enter into contracts, sue and be sued, bless you.
It's a lot of blessings.
Sue and be sued. Neither of those is much fun in case you haven't done a lot of it. You have a board item regularly that takes in gifts and acknowledges them or anything like that.
We recognize them in open session. We haven't had any gifts recently, so there hasn't been anything yet. But
Well,
yes,
that
any
is-
donors are recognized.
That is something that you may have to do.
Dr. Broke, if you don't mind, to give the board members peace of mind, would you elaborate on that sue and be sued? You're sued in your position, but you have representation as a board member. Because I don't want them to think I'm going to get sued and I have to hire an attorney and then it's going to happen, so.
Sure. Back to body corporate. Okay. You know, you and I walking down the street, Gilbert, out here in San Antonio, Texas, we have the same amount of power as far as governing South San ISD is concerned. Sitting in this meeting, a legally posted called meeting, you got a lot of power, I have none. Okay? So that's when you're in your body corporate. That's, as I understand it, what that means. And the board is sued. Now, they can sue you individually, but the burden of proof is significantly higher, and usually if they're about to convict you or win the civil suit or whatever, you really did something wrong if it's an individual deal. But in a normal circumstance, it's the school district that gets sued, and you represent the school district. So, I'm not gonna say it will never happen. I will say, if it does happen, it won't be very soon. You know, it's an ongoing thing. And I was a member of a board of a property owner, a homeowners association, and I shouldn't say this, but surely if I say this, I'll notify tomorrow that we lost that thing, but we've been under suit for like 9 years now on the same thing. So, that sufficient?
Yes, thank you.
Charge fees, change the name of the district. Boy, you'd be popular if you do that, I guarantee you. You can contract with public or private entities to provide educational services. And that is happening within the state. It's happening more than it did previously. And, you know, there's, like everything else in the world, there's some good illustrations of that, and then there's some that aren't working. So if you ever want to consider it, do so, do deep due diligence on that kind of thing. I'm not speaking against charters or any other sort of organization. But I will tell you, be careful about what you give away, because it's hard to give back.
Yes.
School uniforms, have you ever done uniforms?
No,
Have not.
can't afford it.
Stop rushing. Over there at Sam's, they have adopt rules, operate a program. You have dual credit stuff.
Yes, sir.
Extracurricular programs, I know you have those. Before and after school. These are just giving you, and again, it's May, do all these things. Acquire and hold real property. When you do all these things, Kevin O'Hanlon or his replacement is gonna, I'm gonna start rumors, I can't say that, is gonna help you with that. So you don't worry about learning everything there is to know about selling property. I will tell you, Buck's had a lot of superintendent experiences. He probably never has had 74 eminent domain cases in court at one time. That was a lot of fun. A 6-hour deposition on an eminent domain case. I would rather have wisdom teeth. Mineral stuff, Buck, you about ready to?
Yeah, we're almost there. The last pieces are some things, there are a couple things that are spelled out specifically that a board cannot do.
See, I knew it went to the negative stuff. So.
Yeah. And these are them. You can't spend your money on other people's property, right? And then you can't build a hotel. So I expected that to be modified in the last legislative session to also include water parks, because there is a district that now owns and operates a water park.
Is it still going?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I do think that may eventually be added to that.
Okay.
Anyway, I will say this, anytime you come across a policy or a law that's this specific, I always would recommend that you go back and find out why it was passed, because I guarantee there's a good story there. So it'll be entertaining for you. So that's it. Those are all the things you can, you have to, all the things you can do, and then a couple of things that you can't do. Anything stick out to you in that conversation? Anything scare you a little bit?
Not anymore.
No. Not anymore.
I'll just say it out loud. Always be really careful about selections of attorneys, people who deal with bonds, those kinds of things, because that is a fiduciary responsibility matter that can really come back to bite you. And I don't think there's any media here, but what I'm going to say is just true. But that whole bond issuance business is a really tough business. I'm not going to say there are a bunch of crooks in there, because there are not. But it is a really tough business, and it is very technical. And depending on who's president of these United States and their fiscal beliefs, it has gotten really, really hard to do. So just do due diligence to the nth degree.
Now, from a whole, look at all these things, here's the good part for you, is that your duties are spelled out specifically in the shalls. And then what you can do is also spelled out specifically. So back to our getting run into at the grocery store conversation from earlier. It gives you some opportunities to have those discussions with people. And you can say, as a board member, my duties are clearly delineated in our board policy of the things that I have to do and the things that I can do. And most of the time, what they're talking to you about in the grocery store don't fall in any of those, right? And, you know, because I thought personally that my son, Ross, should have been starting quarterback, and really don't understand why. Now, you know, Ross has grown to finally 6 foot, and he might weigh 125 pounds soaking wet. I don't understand why they couldn't see in him.
And I thought mine shouldn't have been the starting quarterback.
But you see what, and so it does give you the opportunity to say, you know what, hang on, wait a second. That's probably outside of my purview here at the grocery store to have that conversation. We have an administration, though, that I'll be glad to connect you to and let them have an opportunity to handle that issue, because that's what they do. And so it is a good point for you to use, because if you haven't yet, you will be cornered in the produce section somewhere to be asked about something vital to education that usually, you know, it has to deal with extracurricular or cheerleaders, yeah, or other issues. And so I would just encourage you to take these few pages out of this book and just kind of make sure that you keep those in your mind as you're walking around, because I think it will help you in the long run. Now let's talk about that administration that you hire. You have adopted policies that outline the duties of the superintendent. And your board, the board of this district has adopted these policies and spelled them out very clearly. I think you can see that the first of these obviously deal with qualifications. So let's go on then to the duties. And the duty of the superintendent is to be the chief executive officer. I like to say the chief educational officer of the school district, the CEO, because that's where everything that you put up with is really what this is about, because it should be about kids in the classroom. Everything else that we do should be about kids in that classroom having an opportunity to learn, to grow, to become who they're going to be to the fullest extent. So the superintendent then assumes the administrative responsibility for all of those things that happen in a difference, especially the annual performance appraisal of the district staff. So all your staff should be appraised at some point annually to see if what they're doing in their completion of their job actually has impact on student learning. You say, well, some of our auxiliary employees don't impact. I disagree. I disagree. The last 2 districts I was in, we didn't have a maintenance and operation department. It didn't exist. We did have a whole group of people that dealt with the student learning environment. And that's how we labeled it. Their responsibility was student learning environment. Because, you know, a lot of times, the first person those kids see every morning is the bus driver. The last person they see is the bus driver. When they walk in that building, there's an expectation about what that learning environment looks like, what they're going to get to eat, how things operate. And so without all of those people there, making sure that that learning environment is the best it can be, the rest of what we do can't even begin to start. And so, but you got to make sure that everybody's annual performance, the superintendent makes sure that everybody's annual performance is reviewed with those things in mind. You can see also then that They get to deal with all the fun things about contracts. You have the final say on contracts. They get to do all the work to get up to that point with contracts. And then managing the day-to-day operations. And then the last sentence, I think, is vital for you to know from the superintendent, is they're charged with implementing and monitoring the plans, procedures, programs, and systems that achieve clearly defined and desired results in the major areas of your district. The conversations that happen here should define then what the administration does, right? I mean, it was really simple in the last couple of superintendencies that I sat in the chair. I just wanted to be the best district in the state of Texas. That was it. That was our biggest goal. That's all I want to be, is the absolute best. Now, did we ever get there? I don't know. In some areas we did. But you get, so our performance was always measured up against that. Let's just be the best that there is, period. And so when you have those type of desired results, everything else comes into focus. Yes, in the good old days, as Dr. Grubbel was talking about, there used to be, the law actually stated that the board president was charged with creating the annual budget. And then it changed to where, and we were talking about in Austin, where the board would create their budget and the administration would create their budget. Now, that duty falls directly to the superintendent and their staff. They get a chance to organize the central office. They do and should have a district level committee that they work with on a regular basis for input. I would recommend personally that be broken up into 3 or 4 committees. I think you should have a teachers committee that you meet with regularly. I think you have a student committee that you meet with regularly. I think you have a combination of staff and community members that come together on a regular basis. I also think as a board that if you can get that community group starting to work, man, what a relief it is to you. One of the big things that my community group committee always did was create the school calendar. And they did it on their own. So the first meeting was always in September of that committee. And the very first meeting in September, school had just started. And we started talking about next year's school calendar. But it was so great from the board's perspective because the board's just going to say yes to whatever the committee brings them, right? And so, and then it's another one of those defense mechanisms for you in the grocery store. Hey, that was a committee of community members that brought that to us. We're just accepting what they brought. You can serve on that committee. Let me hook you up with superintendent. She can get you right on that committee. Then these are some important things because of that word ensuring. See that first word up there? Superintendent's going to ensure several things. Number one, the code of conduct and the disciplinary rules and those things in all the regulations. But then that third one, providing joint leadership with the board to ensure the responsibilities of that board and the superintendent are carried out. And then the last one, make sure that they carry out the policies adopted by the board for the school district. When you talk about evaluating a superintendent, that's really what you're talking about. Is those 2 bullet points right there. Did we jointly together carry out the things that are our responsibilities? And then lastly, did we ensure that all those policies that we created and talked about were carried out? More qualifications. Collaboration with the board. And that's what we're talking about in here tonight is a team of 8. This should be a team of 8. This should be collaborative. Advocate for high achievement of all district students. The rest of those then, down to how about the 4th bullet up? is another, what I think is vital from the superintendent's role is that you should be developing your people. Every employee in your district should be on their own personal development plan. And they ought to be talking to us about how they are going to get better at what they are doing now or what they want to do later. And then, Ms. Sandejo, you can't interfere with the testimony, so just keep that in mind. More duties, educational leadership, you can see those. The third bullet down under educational leadership is important, to oversee the annual planning for instructional improvement and then monitor for effectiveness. Got to have that plan. So I don't know if your superintendent has that plan, by the way, and she's implementing it right now. And she definitely monitors that on a monthly basis. And she enjoys her principals meetings. I know, I'm not sure the principals enjoy it as much as she does every month, but she enjoys those principals meetings. And then a couple of bullets down where she identifies it, they together, not just her, identify the areas needed for improvement and how they're going to get the desired student achievement in those areas. On this page, the last two bullets I think are very vital. You've got to make sure that you recognize your staff when your staff does good things as the superintendent. The superintendent needs to recognize the staff. And then the last one there, how are you going to keep your staff and then make sure your staff is effective in the classroom. So, as we start moving to this part, any questions about superintendent qualifications and duties?
Can I just put my
Sure.
2 cents worth in on that?
And usually means 50 cents when you start.
75 probably. To me, there are 4 categories of what a superintendent should do. For heaven's sakes, superintendent board relations is one of them. That's your responsibility as a board. It's the superintendent's responsibility as a superintendent. The relationship is a joint responsibility. School community relations, and I don't mean some little program where you have 5 people involved. Every time you're in the community, you're thinking, what am I doing? You're shaking hands. I don't care what you say. You're shaking hands. You're slapping backs. That's how I kept the job 38 years. But those are serious things. Planning and evaluation. They said all these things. But you have to, as a superintendent, in collaboration with the board, be involved in planning instruction, facility plans, bond elections, TREs, whatever's involved in planning. Superintendent has to be involved, the board has to be involved. And every time you implement a program, Madam Superintendent, there has to be an evaluation. Don't implement anything without knowing what the end in mind is, knowing what the result is desired, and how you're going to determine whether you're successful or not. And then the biggest obligation the organization has and the superintendent has is to hire and develop. And Buck said it, this organization has an incumbency, they have a debt to its employees to develop every one of them to their absolute maximum skill. And that consists of two parts, just their job skills, what do they do on a daily basis. People have asked me lots of times, were your parents school people? They sure were. My mother was a baker in the cafeteria, my daddy was a custodian and a bus driver. Okay? But develop those people's skills, and then you have that same obligation to develop their leadership, because everybody has leadership down in there somewhere. It's your job to bring it out. We do that for only, but seriously, all four of those things, school community relations, board superintendent relations, planning and evaluation, and hire and develop your people. Write those down sometime, because that's where it is for a successful superintendent. Buck was good at it, I couldn't hold the job. I'm sorry.
No, I agree that every major successful organization in the world does those four things. That's what they do.
Absolutely.
And when you start to see organizations fail, usually, quite honestly, it's the last one that's not getting done. Because what makes people want to work somewhere? What makes somewhere a great place to work? If you read all the studies, it's not money. People will go to a job that gets paid less if that last thing that Dr. Grover was talking about is present for them personally, where they get a chance to grow as who they are. If it's that easy, though, why isn't everybody doing it? Because all those four things that were just pointed out are hard to do. They're difficult to do. And it's difficult to keep that at the forefront as a team of 8 because of the grocery store. Maybe we should just stop going to the grocery store. I don't know.
Deliver.
Yeah, Walmart now. They deliver it to your house. Maybe that's a good thing. But I use that metaphorically. But that's the hard parts is when we get hung up on those things that are happening to individuals, and it's hard to not want to help individuals. It gets to be a problem when it starts to override the organization. So helping individuals in their initial need is a good thing, and we should do that. I think that, we're all called to do that. But your job as a team of 8 is to not do that all the time. Your job is to talk about these things at a different level. When you do get accosted in the grocery store, my advice is this. I had a board member tell me that they had the text that they printed on a copy, and they would sit there and listen to them, and they would say, "Can I have your name and your phone number?" And there was blanks in there, and they would put the name and phone number and text me and say, "Would you please call so-and-so?" And that way they were released because they could say, "I just texted the superintendent. Somebody will get in touch with you." And it released them from having to chase it down. But the last piece, again, I can't underestimate this, is everybody in your organization needs to have a development plan. And we don't do that very well in education. In education, you would think we would be the best at it, but we're not. And there's not a single member of your staff that's not the most important person on this staff. Did you hear me? There's not a single member of your staff that's not the most important person of your staff. Because every one of those people have a chance to make or break kids. By a word, by a pat on the back, by how they operate in their job, they can make or break kids. I'm not sure the staffs always understand that, but that's what they do.
Sometimes they need to be reminded how much they're worth here.
Absolutely. Daily they need to be reminded.
Just like a child, I mean, when you have people who work really hard, they're considered the little bags,
it's good to hear you.
I don't know if you noticed, but your superintendent does that on a weekly basis at least. She tries to do it more, but her schedule, but she was telling me earlier, and she's talked to me several times about it, that, you know, she has a Friday ritual that she does now, and it's all about people. It's about the people in the organization. And you know, the people that are part of a school organization have those skills, or they wouldn't be here. They wouldn't be here, right? You know, in my previous district, we were trying to hire officers for our police department. And, you know, it was difficult to do because the qualities that make you an effective police officer in downtown Houston don't always translate to the kindergarten hallway, right? It's not quite the same. And but once you find those people, then you have to keep developing them to continue to do their duties, but with the kids in mind. When I get to the end of this conversation that I've had multiple times in my career, I always like to say it this way. I hope that when, at the end of this conversation, all of y'all, the team of 8, you should feel two things. You should feel a little bit of pressure, right? You should be starting to feel like, you know what, this is a lot more than what I've been thinking about. But then on top of that, you ought to feel a whole lot of pride that you've been set here. You've been selected. You are the people here and now in this district to make all this happen. So although it's sobering and it's you can see a difficult task that you have, just know that you've been selected to do that. And when you put those two things together and go to work, great things can happen. Great things can happen. So we've talked about all of that. Let's move forward a little bit into transitions. First of all, and I think, do we want to take a quick break?
Yeah, let's take a 5-minute break. I think
Okay.
Ms. Sendejo is going to be leaving us now. Thank you, Ms. Sendejo. We'll break for 5 minutes and then come back.
Yes, are you good? Or do you need to change it?
No.
And
You're gonna reach out to Mr. Joanne.
Oh, yes, sir.
Early in the morning. Or when you find.
yes, sir.
Glad that you're excited about that.
Yes, we're good.
Thank you for, Lamar.
Yeah.
Oh, they're making. Okay.
Sorry, sometimes I want
Here's what I did say.
Yeah.
So nice to meet you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Documentary.
See you at 10.
Is there one?
We'll stay as long as you want.
Thank you.
Uh,
I have one students that can come right after, so.
Is it at 11?
Yes.
Okay, well, he's prepared for an hour of grilling by you. I told him you're going to fall
Good to see you. Thank you, Mr. Mack.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you,
Did I miss
Mr.
anything?
Please be safe.
I don't want to fight it. It's so pretty. I know. Take it to my daughter. She likes to read about it. See you again. We can talk about this. Did you get that other?
I got it right here. Hang on the wall. Just one.
Yes, sir.
I have mine that was made.
Oh, okay. See you.
I'm going to say that you were
Just right now, just say.
They do look good, don't they?
All in sync.
Maybe have more sound.
That's how many, that's the treadmills.
I don't know.
That sounds all right.
Absolutely.
That's it?
Probably.
Oh. I know, I was gonna say.
Okay.
Fantastic. They pass.
Screw you.
One of those days.
The cold front's coming in at 10.
Supposedly tonight, I hope it rains. I hope it rains. My grass needs water.
Oh,
Supposed to do that.
I agreed to on my hand to those people. And we bring it back.
Well, you can, there's just consequences.
Yeah, that's exactly
You're
right.
right.
It's called blood sugar.
All right, who we missing?
No, yeah, I don't even, but, yeah. That's good. That's good.
Thank you so much.
All right, anything that popped in your head after that conversation about board duties and superintendent duties? Any aha moments? You know, so here's, my son was in kindergarten when I became superintendent. And he went all the way through. When we went to my second superintendency, there really wasn't a grocery store in town, but there was a super Walmart. And because of the schedules and whatnot, a lot of times we did grocery shopping after church on Sundays. We would just go straight to we'd go eat somewhere and then go to the grocery store and then go home. My son asked my wife, he could probably first grade, maybe second, but I must be first grade. Can't you drive to church too, Mom, and let Dad drive his own truck? And she said, why? Well, I like the eating part. I don't like the standing around a Walmart while everybody for Christ's sake. He was probably literally.
Right.
And so it became kind of a funny deal in our family, and I still to this day do grocery shopping because they just didn't want to deal with, you know. And my wife, bless her heart, she became a master at changing the subject. People would come up and just barrage her with stuff in public, and she would always say, "How's your family?" And, you know, but y'all understand that. It's what happens. But, you know, you have, I think, an easy out in that you have a great administration to direct them to. And then secondly, you can clarify that, you know what, that's not necessarily one of my duties or responsibilities. The beauty of a local school board can't be overshadowed by those things, right? The beauty is that you get to hear those things and you know those things, and it helps them direct the conversations at this level. But it can't be all about this. All right, let's talk a little bit about superintendent transition. We at Moat Casey and Associates, along with our partnership with O'Hanlon, Demarath, and Castillo, we do not do superintendent searches. We're not in the business to do a superintendent search. And we've had this conversation with board officers here and other school board members, as well as administration. We use a title called superintendent transition. You can have a firm come in, and you did, I believe, the last time, right? And they probably even offered you a guarantee, didn't they?
Yeah, we did.
Right?
Do we get our money back?
And well,
Yeah, right.
that if something happened within a certain amount of time. So our belief in superintendent transitions is this, that the transition is a process. And it's really a 12-month process at the minimum, if not longer. Because as you guys go about the process of selecting a superintendent, it's more than about the selection of a candidate. It's about making sure that the team of 8 operates after that selection has happened. There's an old saying in the superintendent world that they hire you for who they think you are, and they fire you for who you really are.
Right.
All right?
That makes sense.
Yeah. And so, what our goal is in our process here is to make us not do that. We want to try to have conversations before, during, and after, so that we all make sure that we're on the same page and moving forward. Because the bottom line is always the kids in the classroom. And when that relationship is not working, you can say it doesn't affect them, but there is a trickle down somewhere. So you can see, here's some things, and some of this is going to be my personal belief, Dr. Roper's personal beliefs, as how we got this. This is the most important thing you're going to do as a school board. The most important thing is to find the right person and get them in that role. And then I use the term manage there, but not in the way of management. The manage that I say is manage the relationship of the team of 8. So your body corporate of 7 plus the superintendent, it's your responsibility along with the superintendent to manage that relationship. You have to manage the actual transition process. You have to know going in that this is going to be a process, and there are things that we're going to have to do along the way to make sure that this comes out. You got to engage your community. I firmly believe this, that you must engage your community in this conversation. And we'll talk about how we do that as we go forward. But your job then is to be the conduit for what you hear in the community of what we're looking for. And then I personally believe the board has to understand and even require that this be a transition process, not a hire. That's not how So when your superintendent hires a member of their cabinet, right, their executive level leadership, do you think that it's as simple as a couple of interviews, I like them the best, let's put them in place, and then never have another conversation really again about, no. As soon as that person is hired, the conversations start. Okay, now in the interviews we talked about this, but we really mean this. And by saying we really mean this, here's the actions that we take according to that, right? I mean, do we really mean all kids? We say those words, right? All. But do we really mean each and every child? Because in an interview, people are going to throw those words, oh, I believe, and, each and every. But if you say those words, man, those words have meaning. And they have impact on what you do. So through this transition process, you can see that it starts with trying to figure out who you want, okay? And so there's some simple pieces of this that you have to get from a broad point of view. You have to be talking about these simple requirements, but this is not, no, let me rephrase this. None of these lists in this book or on this PowerPoint are exhaustive. These are simply illustrations. But as we go through this process, we will exhaust those lists with you and the community. But see, some of those things are important. I want to talk about number 4. And I think that's an important bullet point that you're going to have to work around one way or the other. I don't know what the answer to that is, and you are going to have to help lead that process. But, I do know this, I'm going to embarrass Michelle. But one of my very first meetings here with the administration, you remember that when I asked the question, how many of you live in this school district? And in that room we were sitting, Michelle was the only one to raise her hand. Now, I'm not saying that you have to live in the school district to be effective, but you don't have to actually have your residence in the school district, but you got to live in the school district. Does everybody follow?
Yeah.
You have to be a part of the community. Nobody, we don't need somebody riding in from the outside to save us, do we? We have what we need in our own community. And so we want you to come be a part of what's going on. Here's some questions. So as we go forward with the selection criteria, it can look, see what I'm saying? You got different formats of what this looks like. Do they need teaching experience at all levels or just one level? Those are questions that you got to answer. I like this, and we'll go through this exercise, not tonight, but we will go through this exercise with the board first, and then we'll do it with community groups after that. But if you got to just pick 3, out of a list like that.
From each one?
Yeah, so like the top, leadership management skills. You got to pick just 3 of those. What is it that you think? And do you think that your neighbor sitting next to you is going to pick the same 3 that you think? And how about your neighbors down the street? Are they going to, but we got to go through the process to have the conversation because we need to know what the community is thinking. If the board thinks that the number 1 only thing up there is a risk taker, okay, say that's the only one that comes out. You say, I'm not picking 3, I'm only picking 1 buck. I don't care what you say. And everybody says risk taker. And the community's not really into a risk taker at this point, right? They say, you know what, we need some stability and some movement along You see that, so you gotta make sure you're in line. Because if you go hire a risk taker, and that's not what the community wants, well, you're gonna have instant conflict. The whole point about creativity, we're gonna work a little bit on how to define what is that. I mean, there are some things that are good things to be creative on, right? The other things that you're talking about, you know, well, we're gonna change the school schedule. We're gonna go in the evenings instead of in the morning. Well, that's creative, but it may not be what the community is looking for. And again, you have copies of all this in your I think the conversations that each of these things are going to drive may be more important than the outcome. Everybody follow me? The fact that you're going to have a conversation about what it means to create an atmosphere of trust and mutual respect, that conversation was going to lead with, is that one out in there? Oh. We did. I'm sorry. So, all of these criteria sheets that we talk about lead to, you can see what, you know, if you got to pick 3, which ones you going to pick? Here's a great, I love this. So if you want a quick survey for your community, this is a great survey for your community. And I would highly recommend that you do it not just in the superintendent transition, but you do something like this every year. But the second 2 questions there, what's the most outstanding features of our district? What are 3 most pressing issues that we need to work on? I think knowing that on a regular basis is a good thing, because you may think you know what the 3 most pressing issues are to you, but the rest of the community have 3 other most pressing issues. Constant communication. So, after we go through that process with the community, and we will lead that. You won't have to do that. You'll need to come to some of those meetings when you can get there, but we will lead that process. It will then produce some things that we can work off of, right? That I include the first one there for every school district, is that this ought to be a professional destination, not somebody's. Now, on top of this, the flip side of that is this. In my career, I always said I'd rather have a superstar for 1 year than mediocre for 15, right? But the idea going in should be that this is where they want to be. This is their destination. You can see that if you go through that process, it'll come up with, so like under professional preparation and experience, I love that first bullet, walked in the shoes of staff. My first job ever for like a real company, I worked for the carpenter down the street. Started when I was 10, working for him, but when I was 15, this is how old I am, and I was 15 and I went to work for JCPenney. So they didn't even have the labor laws that we have now, and that's a whole different story. But my first job was, I was a custodian at JCPenney. And we had to be there at 5 in the morning, store opened at 10, and we cleaned the whole store in those 5 hours before it opened at 10. You know, when you sit in the superintendent's chair and you talk to the people that take care of your buildings on a day-to-day basis, it's important for you to know what they have to go through on a day-to-day basis. If you've ever walked into the bathroom in JCPenney's after a Saturday Christmas sale on a Sunday morning, you can truly appreciate when those guys walk into the bathroom after a basketball game on a Friday night, right? I think walking in people's shoes, there are a lot of people that are going to tell you that leadership is leadership and you can transpose those from one area to the other. I don't personally believe that. I think you need to have somebody that has an understanding of the school system in general. It also then criteria lists like this. The last one, accessible to the staff, community, and the board. As a board member, those of you that have been around for a little bit, is there anything more frustrating than not being able to get an answer? When you need an answer. Is there anything more frustrating than that? I always explain to my staffs that kindergartners love surprises. School board members and superintendents, not so much. Don't really care for surprises. So these are the things that we will help the district walk through and then help you compile those things. And we'll actually ask you to use 7 to agree on those things before we move on. Then we'll set up interviews. Well, let me tell you the second step of that. All of the applications are going to go to O'Hanlon's office, okay? And so the attorney's office will receive all the applications. Then we're going to show you every application. You're going to get to see everybody that applied. I don't have a stable of people that I'm looking to place in jobs. Dr. Grobel doesn't even know anybody anymore.
I'm too old to
Put in jobs. What we are going to do, though, is everybody that applies, once you express interest in them, then we're going to go do some reference checking on it. And we do have those contacts where we can call, if we don't know them specifically, we know somebody that does know them. And we're going to find out. We're not going to call the references on their reference sheet. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
We're going to call to find out.
the very end.
That's right. So then when we come down, you're going to pick how many you want to interview. We're going to help you select questions. I think there's questions in there, sample questions in your book. Go to the next tab.
Yeah. Tabs.
Number 7. So you have all these questions that I have on these slides. What I really need you to do, this is one area where starting even tonight, this is homework that you'll have to work on. You need to look through these sample questions and start thinking in your mind which questions, what kind of questions. And you may have other questions you want to ask. These are just samples. But what questions do we need answers to in order to make our decision?
Just so they'll know, Michelle has the drive that has the PowerPoint presentation on it, so she can make you copies of that.
Yeah. The questions are in your book, but for the other criteria, things that weren't in the book, she has a copy of. But as you go through the questions, there's some good questions I think that people need to know the answer to. I like the second one. Find out how Dr. Open and I had this conversation just the other day. I got my first high school principalship, a little bitty town up by Sherman on the Oklahoma border. 3A district then, it's probably a 2A now. I believe it stayed 3A in the reclassification. Nobody told me anything. I didn't know what was going on. But it was our first home football game. And so, luckily I got there early and I pulled my pickup up and it was right by the gate into the field. Well, a little after halftime, here comes this lady walking up to me and she hands me a money bag. The stuff full of money. And at the time, it probably was, you know, $3,000 or $4,000, but what as a young principal, that's a whole lot more. So I looked at her and I kind of panicked and I said, well, what do I do with this? And she said, well, you're supposed to take it and put it in that safe that's in the floor in your office, but the safe doesn't work. She said, so I don't know what they did with it previously. So I'm looking around and of course, there's no, you know, it was the first game of the season, so the superintendent had left at halftime, you know, but I'm by myself. So I went out and luckily the band truck had pulled out after halftime and I was able to pull my pickup into the gate and shut the football, actually in the football field, and shut the gate behind it. And I put it in underneath my front seat and I locked it and I stood by that door the rest of the night. And I took it home with me. And I walked in with my wife and I said, and we stuck it between the mattresses. We didn't know what to do. And, you know, I look back on that story now and laugh, but I wasn't laughing at the time, dude. I had no idea what to do.
You had a tougher job than the principal in Calvert when I was superintendent there. He comes to the defensive line, so the superintendent got to take it back in the dark in the principal's office.
But you gotta have, I mean, those are some things that you gotta be thinking about, and that's systems, and that's what all the conversation leads up to this. Dr. Grope talked to you earlier tonight about a budget planning calendar. How do you implement a budget? I think you need to be thinking about all the systems that you need in your district and put them in place. And whether you're sitting here 20 years from now or not, those systems should be in place and they should be operational. And you shouldn't have a first-year principal with a bag of money shoved in his hand, right? There should have been a system in place. And guess what? The next week, we had a system in place. So I had the student resource officer.
The policeman.
That's exactly right. And they took it to the bank.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of questions you need to be thinking about in your mind about issues in the district that you want to have answers to as you go through this process, right? I like that. What is micromanaging? I like systemic. How do you systemically improve your knowledge and skills as the administrator? They better be able to answer it. All right. Questions you can't ask. There's a. I think that's in the next one. 8. This is the second part of your homework. These are the things that you need to look at so that you know during the process to not ask them.
And as Buck said earlier, that's not an exhaustive list.
No.
But that's a list of BFOs, blind flashes of the obvious. Don't ask those.
So the questions that you can ask, what you're going to work on those. The questions that you can't ask, you're going to make sure that you're very familiar with those as we move forward. So there's a vacancy announcement already put together. Our office in O'Hanlon has put that together. You have a copy of it.
You know, just real quick, I was just skimming through the illegal questions to ask, and I'm a government contractor, so I've done background investigations. Is that these questions are? It's not a background investigation. It's a interview.
That's correct.
Right. So.
So you'll see that in that vacancy announcement, the application process is spelled out. Yeah.
On this right here, this is actually out right now?
No, it's
Oh,
not.
okay. I'm just saying, is this why I mean?
No, this is just, all of this is draft
Oh.
at this point. This is another big piece, so yeah, back to the announcement page. Yes, if you have input on how that looks, or if you want to make suggestions for changes, please let us know. The next thing is this, is you need to be thinking of, you got lots of homework to do. don't you? You thought I was coming to give you all the answers tonight, didn't you, Mr. Carter?
I was hoping.
Yeah. The next thing is you need to start thinking about what a salary and benefit package looks like. And there's some questions on there that we probably need to have answered before we get into that process of interviewing. Some of the ones that are unusual are life insurance, annuities, moving expenses, annual physicals, those kind of things.
Is it appropriate to have a question under the questionnaire? Have you ever been bought out by a district while under contract?
They're for the application.
Under questionnaire in the application.
Yeah, we can have that question.
I think so, because I think this last time, well, the time before, the previous superintendent before, we didn't know that this person had been bought out of Corpus and in Houston. By that time, it was too late. And we found out the issues were the board relationship with the superintendent, and that's why he left and was being bought out. So I think had we known, probably may have been different superintendent.
Well, that's again what this is about, right? You hire them for who you think they are.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And so, yeah, we can add.
That ask specific questions around their corporate relationship.
Right, with the board.
So if any of those issues that you want to, on any document that you have in your hand, want to add or subtract, if you'll just let Michelle know, who, send her an email, she'll compile those for us.
Sunday. You know, Sunday, right?
No, we'll send these to Michelle.
Okay.
Yeah. These will
I just
be-
want to, I've been conditioned to,
Yeah.
straight to the superintendent, not anywhere or anyone else.
So for this one, and she has my email too that she can send out. So if you'd rather send them just to me or to Mr. O'Hanlon,
Okay.
that's fine as well, or any one of us. So.
Gotcha.
So then, you'll need to look through this as well, establish that calendar of what that looks like. This is obviously an example. It doesn't have the dates on there.
So the dates that are on here now are just
Sample.
Yeah, well, so in your book, we actually put some dates closer. This is a kind of a standard slide that we use for everybody.
number 4, right?
Yeah, number 4. But there is something, so you can see that that is an example at number 4. But you can see up here, there's some other things in there that we didn't
Oh, okay.
that we didn't include in that.
All right.
But if you want to include stuff like that, we can. There, you're going to visit the applicant's home district.
Okay.
You're going to bring back more than one person for a second round of interviews. Are they going to bring their family with them that night? Those are all questions that we have to answer. And you can see on the date in tab 4 of that calendar that you're looking at a June
It's June.
start.
July.
Or earlier, if they, depending upon where they are. But by June, we would need them here. Here's the second part of the calendar, though, which is the second page of that tab. And this is where our again, system differs in that after they're named superintendent, And we think the board, the new superintendent and the community needs to re-establish their community beliefs. They need to re-establish their Lone Star governance and how the superintendent is oriented to that. You're going to find that there's not very many superintendents that have Lone Star governance. So they'll have to probably go through that again and then orient it with the board. Then there's two things there. There's a 3-month transition. That is a meeting where we come back to you and have conversations with the team of 8, and then we do it again at 6 months. Probably going to do it at 12 months as well. It kind of depends on, but we want to make sure that we can. And so let's talk about those meetings a little bit. We're going to meet individually with every one of you at 3 months. We're going to meet individually with every one of you at 6 months, so that we can make sure we know if there's anything that's lurking, right? And we're going to get that nipped in the bud.
Dr. Gilcrease, if whoever the superintendent is, going back to Lone Star governance, as you said, the superintendent says, I've not done, in my district, we don't have Lone Star governance, and if that's his preference, and if the board is in agreement, then that's something that we should decide on, to either not go with Lone Star governance, or try something else, or...
No, absolutely. I use LSG because they have some accepted things that are out there. What I mean by that is whatever governance system that you're going to use, you all have to agree to that, and then you need to be oriented together in that, so that there's not any.
But I think we've all had discussions on Lone Star governance and how we feel about it. So that might be a discussion we'll have to, even maybe during the interview process, maybe questions to the superintendent about Lone Star governance. We can ask.
I think those are valid questions that need to be answered in the process.
The point is, you have to have a system.
Right.
Whatever the system is, that's, the district lacks processes and systems.
Right. And I think Mr. Rodriguez has mentioned or suggested maybe transitioning to the TASB. It's called exceptional
governance. Exceptional governance.
exceptional governance, which is similar to Lone Star governance.
Whatever you're comfortable with, you have to have a system.
Absolutely.
And the superintendent has to buy into it.
Right.
But we can't just go down the road.
No, I don't think that's the intent, is not to have anything. It's to switch from LSG to the exceptional governance.
That's LSG is an example.
Yeah, that's just an example. But, so and it's more than just the system, it's the operation of the system. So I've seen issues with systems where it's not as open communication as it should be between the board and the superintendent, and there's a blame on the system. Well, let's say that system says that, well, then I think that the team of 8 needs to address that issue with the system and correct it. But we can't, we need systems, they're going to guide us and direct us, but it's going to be about the system that operates within the school district.
We all know this. When you give something a name, you make it easy to attack. Okay? Now, maybe you haven't ever noticed that, but I know this. Every time you put a system in place, when you give it a name and something goes wrong, which inevitably it does, they attack it by name. So I agree 100% with what you just said. You have to attack it and correct the system as soon as you possibly can. Don't let that fester, don't let it linger.
Hence the reason why our transition program is we're going to have a meeting in 3 months.
Right.
We're going to have a meeting in 6 months. We'll probably have one in 9 months and in 12 months. Because as the system starts to work itself out, we got to cut all that stuff off. You don't need to have the feelings that I know this board had about not knowing where you were financially. And that was a real feeling that was here. And what, you know, the part is that I like to explain to people is it really doesn't matter if it was true or not. The board felt like they didn't have the information that they need. So you got to work out the system to make that happen. And, you know, some people say, well, okay, well, they had everything they needed. Well, no, they didn't feel like they had that. So that's what the process is over the course of that first year. It's just to make sure everybody keeps staying on the same page. And that's the difference between what we do and what others do. Because what I haven't told you is that in these transition meetings, you're going to get 5 years of financial data. You're going to get 5 years of academic data. You're going to get your data in both areas compared to like schools that look like you. And you're going to have open conversations with the superintendent about what all those things mean, and then where you go from here.
I don't have questions, but I have, there's some of the, like the dates, Dr. Gilchrist, your proposed dates were not in here. So if we can have Michelle, whatever was presented, but that was not on here, can you
We'll just
share
send you the
that
whole
with us?
PowerPoint.
Yeah, because the dates are different. And I think that's, a timeline is something that we really need to look at because it's going to come quickly to the holidays. Before we know it is January and we don't have a timeline. So Michelle's going to send out the proposed timeline that was up there. And if you have a different timeline, just put on there what you think the dates are. But take into mind that if you're looking like, let's say March to the 2nd, okay, is 4 days enough for interviews? So you have to take that into consideration. And then 6 to the 17th for the second rounds. But you can put your own proposed dates so that if we need to change it to make it longer or shorter, we can do that.
So for the proposed dates for interviews, could we wait until we see how many candidates it actually is? So we're not like scheduling like 4 days for something we don't need, or do we need longer because there's more candidates? You know, can we do that after we see how many we have in
Well, we have to
applicants?
have a timeline. Yeah, that's
So my recommendation would be that we set aside 3 days in a row, or 3 days in a week.
Okay.
And whether we need them or not,
Okay.
it's easier to cancel them than
Then
it is
not
to
have it,
to
yeah.
add it.
Yeah.
And so if you know, so let's do this. Michelle,
This is specific to the district.
yeah, Michelle, let's do this. Michelle will help us. She's going to send out the calendar that we have that has some dates that you have a copy of, and then y'all can see how that works around with your personal calendars. You need to look through those and make sure you know what those mean. So she'll send that, and we'll all just work together in an email loop. That, you know, if somebody's going out of the country March the 2nd
right.
for 10 days, then that's not going to work, right? So.
I did an interview with a guy that was out of the country, and he was like, joined by phone.
Yeah.
Keller
That
Ryan.
doesn't work as well.
It didn't work.
Your body language tells you a lot.
Dr. Gilchrist, is there a digital copy of this?
Yes.
I'll find it out.
Yeah.
I'm a paper.
They were just trying to do what was going
Yeah.
on.
We can get, we'll send the digital copy to Michelle of the book itself.
Thank you.
Any questions,
So-
Dr. Gilchrist? Or,
Your homework,
okay.
just spell out your homework, make sure everybody understands. What is it?
Good. Questions?
Yep, questions, right? Start thinking about how you want to go about building the characteristics. And then the last part is the calendar. Once we establish your calendar for how that operates, then we will get with Michelle and them and establish the dates to have the community conversations. We need to have at least 3 of those, and we need to have it with staff as well.
And that will happen during what stage of the transition?
Early. It's going to happen in the month of January.
In January.
That's something I had actually talked with Mrs. Santejo about, and I think I mentioned to Gilbert and several words that that's one thing that's lacked here is sometimes, and I'm not saying anybody here, but it's forgotten why we sit where we do. And we're entrusted, yes, but at the end of the day, it's not our voice and what we want, but our communities. And that's who we represent. So I had actually asked her if we could form 3 committees, which would be one with the community members, parents, stakeholders here in the district, and that it not being handpicked, that people who truly want to come and sign up, and once it's filled up, then it's filled up. But just the different, like you said, and I think that's important to get that done like ASAP. You know, we want to start, if we want the community to entrust in us, then we have to involve them, and they don't feel involved, and they haven't felt for a very long time. We will never get a bond, we will never get a TRE unless we build that trust, and that trust is bringing them in. So I hope that that can get started like ASAP. It's important, it's very important, and our principals and our teachers, and I even think that, you know, we need to hear from our officers, we need to hear from our bus drivers, we need to hear from everybody, because everybody, like you said, is important. If one piece out of a machine gets taken out, that's it, the machine doesn't work. So everybody needs to be involved, and I just think we can do that ASAP, would be great.
So every year that I have a district education improvement committee operating, that will develop the calendar. So there's two funny anecdotes about that. The first year I had it, it was such a powerful process that when I took it to the board that I was working with at the time, the community made the recommendation. I had a board member vote against it because they didn't like the start date. And so this was a this was a January board meeting. We were on May elections in that district. Before the next morning rolled around at 10 o'clock, he had an opponent, and he lost that election in May, all because he voted against. And the rest of the community wasn't necessarily 100% in agreement with the calendar, but they were agreeing of the process of how the calendar was built. And it can be that powerful.
It is what it is.
The last district I served in, every year the conversation came up about whether or not you take the Monday after the Christmas break, if that's a teacher work day or not. And it came up all 5 years, all 5 calendars, because the teachers want, right, that Monday to be an easy, a transition day for them back. But the question was that they heard from other people in the community, and I'll never forget, it was a doctor, and he said, I take the week of Christmas off. And he said, but come Monday, 8 o'clock, I got a patient sitting in my office, and I got to be on my game. And so I love those 2 stories because it's the beauty of really engaging your community. And when we get to that point in the district, I think the fun part is that's when it's really fun to be on the board, is because now you truly are just dealing with the community and listening to what the community says and enacting it.
So, when I was deputy superintendent in Great Rock Colleyville, I had to plan the calendar. I have no idea why. I don't think Superintendent Lyman can do it. But, so I did all this research, and man, I was ready to go. And we figured out, back then we still went to school Monday and Tuesday of Thanksgiving week, okay? And we went back like 10 years. And the attendance percentages on that Monday and Tuesday were just terrible. So we're going to give people what they want, et cetera, et cetera. So we went back to dismissing for Thanksgiving on the previous Friday, right? 2 years later, I checked the percentages. They were exactly the same Monday and Tuesday were. So don't overthink it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it just doesn't matter. Do the best you can.
And as much community input as you can have makes it
Absolutely.
makes makes it as good as it.
But don't make your job any harder. It's hard enough already. Don't make it any harder.
Remember the high salary that Dr. Grove's about.
Yeah.
All receiving.
Right.
Any questions?
Board members, any other questions?
No, just some comments. Thank you for the presentation and all the information. I think it's valuable. I know I've found it as valuable. I'm definitely going to go through. Because the one thing I didn't know was, well, what can and can't we ask? Well, that's been provided for me now, and I can go do my homework and kind of put some of those things together. So it should be interesting. It's going to be good. So I appreciate that. I appreciate everybody's efforts.
Anyone else?
And if you don't have my phone number, so I know some of you do, but if you don't have it, Mr. Rodriguez will be glad to provide that for you. Actually, you just ask him, he'll text it to you. And same with Dr. Grove.
Yes, sir.
Same thing.
I thought I was kind of left out in left field on my own. So to me, that said that this person should have the heartbeat of this community. They need to understand this community, the district in itself, because if you get somebody who doesn't, it's not going to, as we have seen over and over, it doesn't work. So, that I feel good that I wasn't out of left field. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, and so I say even the next step is this, that you have to know that. It can't be that they answered that in an interview.
Yes, but know it,
You
yes.
have to be able to verify that that's who they are.
Okay. If there's no more questions, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Do I hear a second? Second. I have a motion and a second. The meeting is adjourned. The time is
Vote.
8:07. Oh, I'm sorry. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. 8:07.
All right, don't forget you have at least an hour's worth of homework.
Yeah.
Not with the rest.
That's how you get your third out.
Oh, yeah.
You second?
Oh, you seconded?
So we did, or?
Michelle, here's the.
We'll send you a copy of the electronic.
Okay.
It's good to see you.
And I remember the lady.
Oh, yeah. She was here.
I was not.
She was. There was another lady.